With its vast territories and well-organized institutions, the Ottoman Empire was the superforce of its own time, ruling over almost every region from the deserts of the Middle East to the rivers and forests of Eastern Europe. They left their mark on the pages of history with their vast institutions, welfare systems, and near-invincible military strength. The image of the ever-conquering Turkish menace had been a source of fear for many European kingdoms throughout centuries. Today, we will see together how this image was shaken and how the Ottoman advance was reversed, eventually leading to a collapse which would take 240 years. When I said that the Ottoman Empire was a superpower, I wasn't joking. Their power and influence reached well beyond their own borders. When they wanted something to change in Europe, they could actually do something about it. They incited rebellions, backed influential figures, and supported minor states against their rival kingdoms and empires. What makes a good enemy for a family of emperors? You guessed that right, another family of emperors. The Habsburgs, the family who ruled over the Holy Roman Empire, had been fighting with the Ottomans for 300 years. Among other things, they really didn't like the fact that the Ottomans were supporting Hungarian rebels against the Holy Roman Empire. The aggression between the Habsburgs and the Hungarians eventually convinced the Ottoman Sultan to declare war, and this was the first mistake made by the Ottomans. They did not arrange the time of the declaration of war well enough and ended up giving their enemies too much time to prepare. The Ottoman Sultan commissioned the Grand Vizier Mustafa to oversee the war. The army was mobilized, the vassal states were called to fight alongside the Ottomans, and the army set out to the west. The Ottomans promised their Hungarian allies that they would establish Vienna as the capital of the new Kingdom of Hungary. The army, which consisted of Ottoman household and provincial troops, was massive. It eventually grew even bigger, with soldiers coming over from the Ottoman vassal states like Crimea. The Ottomans were unstoppable. They marched to Vienna. Emperor Leopold had to flee the city with some soldiers and civilians, and had to wait until reinforcements arrived. You see, there was a deal between the Polish and the Habsburgs. If Vienna got attacked, the Polish would come to help, and if Krakow got attacked, the Habsburgs would go to help. Too bad for the Ottomans. Jan Sobieski, the King of Poland, decided to honor this deal and set out to help his allies. There was a dispute among the Polish king and the emperor about who would pay the wages of the Polish troops. However, this was settled. Polish troops were paid by the Kingdom of Poland's treasury while they were in Poland. After they crossed the border, their wages were the emperor's responsibility, and both sides also received a good deal of money and support from the Pope. The Ottoman army finally laid siege to Vienna. Compared to Ottoman's vast army, there were only 23,000 troops left in the city. Their only advantage was the number of their cannons. Help from the Habsburgs' allies still hadn't reached the city. It was actually possible for the Ottomans to take the city with a storming attack, without giving their enemies more time to prepare. But they didn't attack. Why? There are actually two reasons for that. First of all, let's not forget that this was a siege. It is very difficult to completely capture and hold a city, even if you have all the numbers on your side. Also, there was the Ottoman tradition. The Ottomans did not like having to capture every city by force. They had a centuries-old tradition of making other states their vassals by promising them peace, safety, and religious tolerance in return for their allegiance and loyalty. If the Ottomans had to fight for a city, the Ottoman commanders had to let their soldiers loot the city as a compensation for their blood and toil. The Grand Vizier wanted to act in accordance with this tradition, mainly because Vienna was a city full of riches, and he did not want to promise his soldiers a plunder should they be victorious through battle. He wanted to take the city without any fighting and keep the riches of the city intact for the Ottoman Empire to make use of them. He sent envoys to Count Ernst Rüdiger, who was in charge of the city's defenses. He promised that the city would remain Christian and would be left in peace should he agree to hand it over to the Ottomans. Ernst Rüdiger believed in the possibility of holding out the Ottomans until help arrived, so he refused. The defenders came up with an idea to demolish the houses around the city's main defensive lines to strip the attackers of their ability to use these houses to protect themselves from enemy missiles and fire. The Ottomans relied heavily upon their battlefield engineers and workers. They dig up long trenches through their own line of attack to provide their own troops with covers. They also had battlefield miners who would dig underground ways to the enemy's walls, place kegs of powder beneath them, and set them on fire to make the defenders' walls collapse. The Viennese countered these miners by digging their own underground tunnels to intercept them. Nonetheless, the Ottomans eventually managed to bring several walls down. The Ottomans took several parts of the outer city, and the defenders decided that it was time to retreat back to the inner city to make a final stand. They would not have to stand much longer because the relief army with their Polish allies had finally arrived. The relief army consisted of German troops coming from different regions of the Holy Roman Empire and the Polish troops, led by John Sobieski with his renowned Polish winged hussars, the elite heavy cavalry of the Polish forces. Grand Vizier Mustafa now had to fight the battle on two fronts. He had to maintain the siege on the inner walls of the city, and he had to counter the attack of the relief army. His decision was to order the Khan of Crimea to counter the attack of the relief army with his cavalry. Some historians argue that the Khan of Crimea did not want to take the risk of going against a combined army, and eventually abandoned the Ottoman soldiers. The Ottomans tried to launch a counterattack against the relief army before their forces could come nearer. They had also placed large kegs of powder beneath some parts of the city. Their plan was to counter the enemy attack on the field and break the last lines of defense in the city at the same time. They were, however, unable to do this, as the defenders located the kegs of powder and disarmed them. The combination of Polish winged hussars and the German troops were able to crush a significant amount of the Ottoman army. The following counterattacks from the Ottoman side failed. The Ottoman army scattered away. The defeat was seen at the time as the greatest defeat of the Ottoman Empire. The Grand Vizier was executed for his failure. Furthermore, their defeat encouraged the Europeans, and they finally started believing that they could put an end to Ottoman expansion. This was just the beginning of some very bad days for the Ottoman Empire. After the defeat at Vienna, the Ottoman Empire continuously lost territory. The Holy Alliance between the Europeans was further bolstered by Russian contribution. The constant war with the Europeans and the Russians was a heavy burden on the Ottoman economy. The Ottoman Empire was huge and well established. There were many factors contributing to downfall and collapse which took 240 years. Yet, it is certain that the defeat at Vienna was a significant starting point, a beginning of the end for the Ottoman Empire.